16. It was close to midnight when my mother and Ollie came home. Both father and I had stayed up to wait for them. Either of us would have been able to sleep anyway. We spent a quiet evening in the living room together, not really talking. We tried to turn on television, but there was something about the horrific happiness of everyone on screen. For the presenter of the quiz showed to the actors too in the Iceman's. Everyone's bright two white smiles that just made me feel worse. It was all my fault. I should have been keeping a closer eye on my brother, and now he was hurting. He fell asleep in my mother's arms as she cuddled him close to bed that night. Father slept fitfully. I could hear him from my room, and I knew I wouldn't be sleeping at all tonight. I didn't. The next morning at work, I worked through that day as if in a dream, and no one seemed to notice. For the first time since I started, I felt indifferent to the goings on. When I was set to fetch Joey from the lab, I didn't even knock. I just opened the door. "Leave me alone!" That shook me out my face, and I backed away, closing the door as I did. "Oh, sorry." Joey turned as I was about to shut it. "Oh, not you, Rose. Come in, come in." "Okay," I said. I didn't have brain power to question the interaction. "I was talking to Henry." He casually waved toward an empty stool, and I nodded. It didn't strike me as a particular delusional. I just assumed some genius make-believe was at work, or something. I honestly didn't care. "Who's Henry?" I asked, propping myself on the large center table, sitting so my feet was dangling beneath me. Why was I here again? "A traitor," he replied it. Oh, I hate traitors. Not that I have any in my life, but the concept of them was lousy, so I figured I did. Besides, again, I didn't really care. Joey turned fully around his seat. "Exactly. Nothing's worse than someone you thought you trusted just abandoning you." I nodded, and I felt my stomach clench as I had abandoned Ollie. Just ignore him in the favor talking about fancy parties and stupid useless things. And now he has the gall to just sit there and judge me. Me! I stuck around, you know. I actually did it. I nodded again. "You did?" Maybe I was dreaming actually. Maybe I was falling asleep after all. None of what Joey was saying made me particularly sense. Joey turned fiercely to the stool, pointed at. "You see? Even she sees it, and she's a nobody." He paused, fingers still afold, his brow furrowed, and he leaned back into his seat, his legs slipping out so that he was almost lying backward. Hand to his forehead. "Forgive me, Rose. I hadn't had much sleep. My old nightmares haunt me in my waking hours now. I know the feeling. Had he just insulted me? Henry was, well, that's no matter. It's no matter." He brought it up his other hand as he covered his face, then drawing them down to his chin, pulling the skid with him. With them, he let them drop to his side. "I did the other pass with the ink last night. I think this Saturday's going to really bring in the crowds. I can't wait for the feedback for our test group." He looked over at me and smiled. "Do you know what I mean when I said that? Test group?" "No, about the pass with the ink." I shook my head. I felt the string from my neck again, and it was bubbling all about, and this time not from elation, but rather a distant indifference. The ink from the film from our show had proved through another silly vision treatment. I was working on it all night, twiggling things, perfectly things, and I think it's about something even more impressive. It was all very impressive and impressive, I added. He snapped his fingers and pointed at me, much in the same way he had been pointing at the stool. "Yes, impressive. Excellent word, Rose. You're good with words. You should be a writer. I could hire you as a writer. When you start making original cartoons again, when I open up my studio again. Thank you." I felt rather stupid at that moment, so I wasn't sure exactly what he's talking about. Suddenly, I remembered. "They want you on set?" "Huh? That's why you're here. Okay then, let's go to set." He hopped out of the chair, suddenly full of energy again. I was envious. I still sitting there on the table like a sack of potatoes. I heard the sound of the door open, and I slammed shut behind me. I turned. He had left. Just like that. No waiting for me or anything. I was alone in the lab. I slipped out to the table and looked around, approaching Joey's desk. I saw drawings, sketches of some kind of cartoon hallway. "Of course you're here." I spun my heel. Evan stood like he's tended to, framed in the open doorway. "How do you open doors so quietly? How are you always in my space?" I had no answer. "But I also haven't done anything wrong." "Well, you say you're going to teach me, remember?" "It was yesterday, so yes." He sat her into the room and rolled his eyes at me, dropping a heavy stack of round metal containers, that kind kept the film reeds in, on a large table. "Tell me about the silly vision." I said, walking up to him. His presence feared me somehow. I felt slightly more in Guy's size. I thought you already knew all about that. He pulled out the drawer within the table, produced a roll, masking tape, and a marker. Well, how does it work with the glasses? Finally, he gazed at me. He didn't seem particularly enthusiastic to share, but he made a promise to me, and I could see that mattered to him. It's a simple thick relationship. I didn't know what that means. Evan wrote something on the tape and ripped it off, placed it in the first metal container, and shoved the container aside. It was a natural phenomenon where two things consist in order to support each other. They need each other to function. So the glasses and the silly vision. It's not the silly vision. Please stop calling that. I despise that name. Rip tape. Joey said. Joey doesn't understand his own technology. He came up with the idea, but I made it real. Now he calls it by the same name he used to call something else. Something else. Just because we use the same ink doesn't mean it's the same thing. But Evan slapped the tape onto the table and glared at me. Look, Rose, I'm dealing with a lot. Do you know what he did overnight? Something with the film processing. Evan stared. He seemed surprised I had the answer to his obvious logical question. Yes, he insists that we produce the cartoons for this week's show. He completely redid them. We hadn't tested them at all with the glasses. We had no idea if it all worked that way. We wanted to. The way he wants it to. It's expensive. It's risky. He could have destroyed all the originals. The cartoons are old, Rose. Some other 2 decades old. I didn't have time to educate that with you and get everything ready by Saturday. He threw up his hands. Can I help? Help? I can help. I can do the tape. Maybe. I pointed at the tape, glanced into his hands, and looked at like he was trying to press through the table itself. He looked at me and shook his head like he always whenever he looked at me. Sure, okay, you can do the tape. He slipped over to his wife violently, and maybe I was because I was too tired to think. I managed to catch it by reflex alone. Just do what I ask, and otherwise leave me alone. Okie dokie, I said with a small laugh. He marched past me while still looking at me over his shoulder. Are you drunk? Oh no, never touch that stuff. I pulled out the tape and ripped it up. I held it high, stick to my index finger, letting it dangle like a worm on the hook. What shall I put on this? Bendy and the pie, contact speed 2. He sat in his desk hard with a sigh. As in the letter V and the number 2? Yes, version 2. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Evan looking at the back of his head. I could tell he obviously rolled his eyes at me again. Joey didn't seem to mind that I was probably buying in the studio that week. I barely saw him at all. To be honest, but the times he came to the lab, he seems happy. I was helping Evan. He seemed quite happy in general, despite his starting the week in the full moon when he'd been yelling at his imaginary friend Henry. Clearing this new plan of his, this new version of the film read, was thrilling him. Why aren't you more excited, Evan? This is going to be spectacular. He laughed, slapping Evan on the back heartily. I can't believe we're testing this on Friday night. Have more time, replied Evan. Work films the time? Salute, replied Joey. Then he partly skipped out the door, leaving me alone with an ever grumpier Evan. Not that I particularly minded. At Jen we were doing something real, muttered Evan to himself. And what exactly was that? I asked, hoping this time he'll say. As usual, he offered no answer. My spirits had been raised by the midweek. Mostly it was down to Ollie, who was getting better and stronger every day. He still felt the worst in the evenings. He hadn't been come back to school yet, but he was able to come downstairs to join us for breakfast now, even as he avoided the stove, walking as far away from it as he could to do so. But there was also another reason for my happier state, that I wish it was just an Ollie alone. I hadn't seen Benny again. Most importantly, the man in the trench coat hadn't returned. The lack of both these individuals in my life made me feel a bit silly. By the end of the week, I had been so upset by them in the first place, as the latter had clearly been someone named Joey, and who knows, maybe he even managed to find him and speak to him. The former was detriment on my imagination. Something happened when we were tired at the end of the long day. We were in the dark. Very likely was a giant rat. Of course, it didn't prevent me from leaping when I opened the door on Friday to Bendy sitting on the giant table in the middle of the room. What's wrong with you? Asked Devon. I didn't want to say anything as I approached it, but as I came to the light I felt so stupid and ridiculous. It was a large Bendy stuffed toy, not the real thing, because, of course, there was no such thing as the real thing. Bendy wasn't real. He was a drawing. Nothing. Where did this come from? I asked it. Best pal, he replied it. Joey? I asked it, of course. Not once in his entire conversation did he turn around to acknowledge me, but I was used to it. I knew the back of his head better than the front at this point. I leaned over to pick up the toy. It was very soft. But why? It's for your brother, he said. I haven't mentioned something offhandedly to Joey the other day about him not being well. Not specific, of course, just some general small talk I felt instantly guilty about. But he remembered. I hugged the Bendy. That was so nice of him. Sure it is, Rose. Come on. You know tonight's the big test night for me. I have a lot of work to get done. I'm sorry. Yes, of course. Do you want me to grab you any dinner before I leave? There was a pause, and then, yes, that would be nice. Thanks. Always happy to help. I squeezed the Bendy tightly again. I got home after 8 that night, quietly removed my boots and coat, moving Bendy from one hand to the other to slip up the sleeves. As I was hanging into the closet, Mother approached me, wiping her hands off on her apron. And who's this? It's for Ollie, from Joey. That's just lovely of him, isn't it? Mother beeped and gave Bendy a little pat on the head. Is he still up? I asked it. Should be, she replied. She leaned forward and kissed me on the forehead. There's leftovers in the fridge. Thanks, I said. I immediately made my way up to the stairs to his room. I knocked gently on the door. I had someone out there who wants to meet you, I said. I didn't hear anything, so I opened the door slowly and held a plush Bendy doll through the crack. Hello, Ollie. Your big sister tells me you're very brave, I said with a high, squeaky voice. Bendy doesn't talk, said the quiet voice from inside the room. I paused, opened the door farther, and looked inside. Ollie was lying in his bed in a dark room, his arms over the covers. I could see his bandaged hand. It all reminded me too much of Father. I wanted to flip the switch for the light and let the room flood with brightness, but I had to be gentle with him, poor thing. I guess you're right. But you don't think it's a little funny here for your sister? Sounds so silly. I said. Ollie didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the ceiling. I came over to the bed and sat down as gently as I could beside him. I reached over and pushed his hair on his forehead back up. How are you feeling, kiddo? I asked. I'm okay, he said as I watched his eyes flicker back forward, almost as if he's watching something. I glazed up. But in the dark, I could tell maybe there was a spider or a silverfish across the ceiling. I looked at him again. Does the hand still hurt? He nodded. Little. I still had Benny in my other hand, hanging down over the side of the bed. I put it up next to him on his pillow. Isn't he cute? I asked it. Finally, Ollie turned to look at the toy. A faint smile. He's pretty cute. Yeah, he said. Why don't you just give him a hug? Ollie thought about it for a moment and nodded. He reached out with his good hand and passed Bendy to him. He squeezed him tight between his arms and turned onto his side to face me, holding him close. Rose? He asked it. Yes? Do you ever see things in your imagination? The question sent the chill over me, and I had to remind myself that Ollie was a sweet little boy who didn't know anything about the puddles. He's just asking a typical little kid's question. One of those big questions that always felt really tough to answer, but he tried anyway. Do you mean like when I close my eyes I imagine things? Like would it be like to visit Hawaii or own a pony? I asked it. I don't know, he replied it. He looked so sad, but he still held fast to the Bendy and made me feel a little better. I see things in my mind a lot, like pictures, things I wish I could see, things I have seen in the past I want to see it again. And then there were things that had never happened and I wish to never see, like Evan's broken body, or things that could not possibly exist, like Benny himself walking down the dark hallway. But I didn't say that. I see things in my imagination a lot, said Ollie, ever since I was little. I think it's a family trait, I replied it with a smile, even as my gut dropped. It's fun to play pretend, Ollie nodded again. How do you know what's real and what's pretend? Wow, he really had tough questions today. Answering them felt impossible. Well, real things are real. You can see them, but you also touch them, smell them, and hear them. I guess if your other senses can appreciate it, that means things real. I was asking myself more than him. I never thought about it in more specific terms before. Can you imagine the smells? He asked it. I didn't think you can't, I replied, but I didn't feel certain about that. What about the sounds? I didn't know. I thought about dreams, how real they could be in that moment, had conversations with people. It really seemed like hear them speak. I thought about it if I dream about eating cake, say, when I dream I could taste it, smell it. I think I would. I didn't know what to say, and I was worried that I was getting all wrong. Are you real, Rose? That just about broke my heart. Ollie, of course I'm real. And mother and father? Yes, of course. And Bendy? I paused then. The question was confusing. Ollie had long ago learned the difference between the made-up characters on the big screen and the radio plays and real-life people. He was a little too old to be asking this. At the same time, I didn't want to discourage him or make him feel bad. Well, Bendy is a character in the cartoon. That's all made up. But the toy you're holding, that is very real. Well, Bendy is the character in the cartoon, that's all made up, but the toy you're holding, that is very real. Ollie looked at the toy with Bendy and gave him a little pat. He's soft and squishy, I added with a smile, but not real. I shook my head. No, the character of Bendy isn't real. Not real? I feel strangely uncomfortable, a little, like your skin is too dry or the air is too warm. Hey kiddo, can sisters get hugs too? Or is that reserved only for Bendy? Ollie gave me a little smile and carefully placed the Bendy to one side. He reached out his arms. Sisters always get the hugs. I pulled him in close carefully, not to tear his hand. This is real, I said. This is the best kind of real.